Broadcasting live from Forward Observer Central Command in Austin, Texas. It's the man always out front on the issues. You're listening to Out Front with Samuel Culver.
Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to Out Front with Samuel Culper. I'm your host, Samuel Culper. Isn't it funny how these politicians, they say, oh, I love America. We love this land. I love America, but let's abolish the Electoral College, create two new states to control the Senate, defund the police. Let's radically change the country through mass immigration. Let's abolish capitalism. Let's defend pedophilia. And let's enforce cancel culture against our political enemies, because I sure do love this place. That's basically the message that a lot of these folks are trying to convince us is true, that they do love this place. The fact is they don't love this place. By the way, just one other gripe here, because I saw a bunch of political pundits going absolutely apoplectic because some new poll showed that global confidence in the United States is now at historical lows. Wah, wah, wah. But you know why that is? Look, I'm not going to gaslight anyone and tell you that America is being put first in every category, but the Trump administration has scaled back on putting global interests first, at least some of them. But second, maybe the most important reason why global confidence is at historic lows is because these people, they watch CNN and they watch MSNBC for their news. And so it's no wonder that they don't like America, because they get their points of view from the haters on CNN, the same ones who really love this place, by the way. Hey, if you enjoy the show on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. If you listen to the podcast version, please leave me a 5-star rating and review if you think I deserve it. I work really hard to bring you interesting and highly informative shows like today's, where we are going to be talking about the 1973 Chilean coup. Also, if you want to support this show monetarily, head over to patreon.com/outfront and kick me a few bucks a month to support the show. Thank you for everyone who already shows their support via Patreon. We're about to start building out the podcast and video booth here in the new office. And I tell you, that's been a long time coming. But speaking of Chile, let's go ahead and talk about Chile, which is my second favorite country on earth. 11 September, 5 days ago, marks the 47th anniversary of the Chilean coup, where General Augusto Pinochet, peace be upon him, overthrew socialist Salvador Allende this week in 1973. You know, it's funny because I was rereading a history of that coup rereading it recently. And, you know, the real way that Allende was elected, by the way, he was elected with 36% of the vote. And the only reason he got in with 36% of the vote was because the conservative vote was split between two parties, basically Christian Democrats, which was like the Catholic Party, and the National Party, which is the conservative right-wing party. Well, Allende was elected by just about 1/3 of the country. So how is that for a popular mandate? Let's put this in the proper perspective here. Socialist candidate Salvador Allende lost 64% of the vote, roughly, and he still became president. What's most interesting about this is that the guy who finished second behind Allende was only about 1 percentage point down. He had 35% and some change. 35% of the popular vote. And that was the National Party. That was the right-wing party of Chile. 1 percentage point behind the socialist, and the socialist gets in. So that already riles up the Chilean right. They're already angry about it, and then Allende gets in and goes full Marx. And, well, we're about to get into some pretty fun stuff here. What's interesting is that some of the Chilean left really thought that Allende was too radical and that he had gone too far towards Marxism. Now, in Chile, depending on who you talk to, one of my Chilean teachers, because I studied Spanish down there, she was an avowed communist. And she said, oh no, Allende, oh, he was a martyr. He was some big communist president, like the Great Red Hope or whatever. And then you talk to other people, they say, well, Allende, he was a moderate. He just wanted to implement some reforms. And yes, he was on the socialist side, but he wasn't a bad guy. And that seemed to be pretty much what some people on the left, the Chilean left in the early 1970s, thought as well, because some thought Allende was too radical. He had gone too far towards Marxism. They were concerned about it. Others, this is the Popular Unity Party, by the way, the left, the Socialist Party there. The far left wing of that party thought that Allende wasn't going far left enough. And it sure does remind you of what's happening to the Democrat Party here in the United States today. Some say they're not going. Some say they're going too far left. Some say they're not going far left enough. By the way, that's on the left. At any rate, this is in 1970, and guess who was National Security Advisor at the time? Henry Kissinger. And Kissinger wasn't really feeling it. Allende had been elected by an alliance between the socialists and the communists, and he's like, that's not really going to work for us. So, of course, CIA gets involved. And there used to be this joke that CIA stood for Christians in Action, and I'm going to leave others to debate the validity of that. Maybe at one point it was true. But now a lot of folks call them clowns in action. And in a lot of cases, I think that's appropriate. But back to Chile. Allende's reforms meant basically community organizing because he wanted to reform the whole of Chilean society. He wanted to do land reforms, especially. Even today, Chile is very... there's not really a middle class in Chile. Like, you grow up and you sell fruit at a stand, or you sell shoes at some little market in Santiago. You're either like on the lower rung of economic society, or like you're a doctor or an engineer. You go, and even when I was there were massive protests and riots. Like on a day-to-day basis, we used to watch these protesters get pelted by these water cannons from the police in Bella Vista. The police would use water cannons to try to disperse the protesters and rioters. They were rioting because there was no access to higher education. Like, you went to basically essentially went to a state school, which are not very good. In other words, you're going to graduate and you're just not going to have great job prospects, because all of the best jobs go to people who go to expensive colleges and universities. And that's where all the rich people send their kids to go to college, because they know they're going to graduate from there and be able to get a good job. And so it's basically like there's this, there's kind of this glass ceiling, for lack of a better term. Basically, you're not going to rise economically in Chile, not like you can in the United States. So all this is to say, the thing that Allende was trying to solve is still a problem for many people in Chile even today. But Allende wanted to implement these land reforms, because basically you have these peasants and they didn't have land. They a lot of them owned very little. And so he said, all right, well, let's organize the peasants. And so the Chilean peasants started going out to these estancias, these estates, or like these ranches and stuff. And they just started settling there. They started building their little hovels, or their houses, on this land, massive amounts of land, that was owned by someone else. And they were basically taking land from the ruling class. And so, of course, the ruling class did not like that at all, the ruling class being majority right-wing. Then Allende nationalized the copper mines, too. And these copper mines were a majority of the government's revenue once they were nationalized. And Allende needed to do that to fund the government, to fund all these projects. And so the ruling class, for all this, their response was to disrupt these socialist reforms. So there were demonstrations and counter-demonstrations and clashes in the street, not unlike we're seeing today. These clashes between right-wing and left-wing Chileans. There were strikes among the managerial class. So instead of, you have a worker strike, which is the left-wing strike, Well, these were managers' strikes. So basically, class-based conflict here. And as a matter of fact, it got so bad. There were so many of the kind of management or merchant class shutting down their shops and shutting down production that the workers actually started trying to organize armed groups to fight to keep their workplaces open. And in one case, the workers actually stormed one of these, I forget if it was a factory or what, but they actually stormed the factory and they started production themselves without any of the supervisors or managers or anything. And so, of course, there were large shifts in monetary and fiscal policy. I mean, anytime you get a socialist elected, you're, especially with the kind of reforms that Allende was trying to put in, you're going to get massive disruption. I mean, just history shows. By the way, and just let me make one point on this. For a period of time, it's actually in the New York Times, if you can believe it. The New York Times actually heralded the Soviet Union back in the 1970s, because the Soviet Union was getting 30+% GDP growth, economic growth every year, and so a bunch of apologists for communism basically said, "Oh, look, central control really can work." And this is in the mid 70s, late 70s, something like that, maybe even into the 80s. And they said, "Oh, look, centrally planned economies can work. The Soviet Union is getting 30% GDP growth year over year. How amazing is that?" But eventually, I did a show about this, about extractive economies, basically governments that, the only reason why the Soviet Union had that much economic growth is because it was literally just the growth of government, because they were taking wealth out of the economy. They're taking wealth from citizens in the Soviet Union and just spending it on these massive government projects, which then really enriched a lot of the apparatchiks and ruling class. At any rate, you may have some in the beginning. You may have some really good growth under a centrally planned economy, but it is not sustainable, and that's exactly what we saw here. Actually, we saw the exact opposite. Allende basically just ran the economy into the ground. There was 200% inflation from 1970 when Allende was elected until 1972. So a loaf of bread that costs $5, let's just say, within 2 years, it cost $10. Allende here wasn't wholly to blame, especially not in the later stages, into 72 and 73, because U.S. policy at the time, under Kissinger, was to foment economic and monetary problems so that the United States could foment this popular rebellion against the Allende administration, or encourage or help plan and organize and carry out some kind of military coup against Allende, which is exactly what ended up happening. Now, on a previous episode, I talked about Allende's mindset before the coup. Here's what Allende had to say about the potential for a coup d'etat. He said, quote, this is what he told, I think it was an Italian communist or socialist magazine, late 60s or maybe probably early 70s. Here's what he had to say. If anyone believes, quote, if anyone believes that in Chile, an army coup d'etat would play out like in any other Latin American countries with a simple changing of the guard here at La Moneda, which is the presidential palace in Santiago, he says they're badly mistaken. Here, if the army breaks out of legality, it means civil war. Do you believe the socialist workers would let industry be taken off them? Or the peasants the land? There will be 100,000 dead, a bloodbath. End quote. That's what he had to say would happen. And that's what he said would happen if there was a coup. Of course, none of that happened. It was a bloodbath, but in the other direction. Because on Tuesday, the 11th of September 1973, the military under General Augusto Pinochet, peace be upon him, opened up a can against the socialists. La Moneda, the presidential palace, was bombarded by jets, and Allende actually ended up dying in the presidential palace, either during that bombardment or maybe sometime later when it was stormed by military troops. If you ever go to Santiago, Chile, which I do recommend you do at some point in your life, because it's really, I like Chile quite a bit. It's a cool city. It's like a very European city. I talked before about the police there, very little corruption. Like you go to any other. Okay, I got pulled over once in Mexico because I drove around. I drove around. There's a turnabout. I drove around it twice, and I didn't violate any law, of course, but I did get pulled over, and the guy was basically like, you can go down to the courthouse or the station, and pay the money there, or you could just pay it to me and I'll let you go. He just wanted a bribe. That's the only reason he pulled me over. That kind of stuff doesn't really happen in Chile. The police there are quite good. At least in my experience and in a lot of the things that I read before I went to the country, policing force is pretty darn good in Chile. As a matter of fact, it is a huge expatriate location for expats, European and American expats who are leaving their country and trying to resettle somewhere else, go retire. It used to be, I don't know what this is now, but about $30,000 a year will get you pretty solidly middle class. Like you'll be living life very comfortably in Santiago for about $30,000 US a year. So of course, a lot of retirees will go down there because their dollar lasts longer down there, or their retirement incomes from the United States will last much longer down in Santiago. It's a cool place. You should go. But if you do go, you can still see the pockmarks of bullet holes on La Moneda. The palace there has been completely remodeled, but they left some pieces of history embedded there in the outer walls. And that brings us to 2020 because there's a lot of prognostications, and honestly, it actually is shaping up to be a period of, let's look at this on a spectrum. Actually, a good friend of mine asked me yesterday afternoon, he's like, what are the chances that the election goes off without any problems, and that all this stuff being written about the leftist coup and all this stuff? What if that doesn't actually happen after November? And I said, that's a darn good question. And it's one I've thought about before. I've talked about on the show before about what scenarios are there that would prevent us from devolving into some kind of regional or maybe national type of conflict. And, there was that Democratic strategy firm that came out a couple weeks ago, like 3 or 4 weeks ago now, that said what they expect is that President Trump wins in a landslide in in-person voting in the days, like hours and days after Election Day. Basically, they said, look, on the night or the day after the election, it will appear as if President Trump has won in a landslide. But then you're going to start getting all these mail-in ballots coming in, and then Biden is going to end up winning in these battleground states, and it's going to flip everyone's expectations. Now, that's what Democrats are saying, and I think there's a very good chance of that happening. But to answer his question, are there scenarios where nothing bad happens? No, I don't think there is a single scenario. I don't think there's a single scenario. If Trump wins, and actually, I just was looking at these numbers the other day. There's a new poll out that shows that like 40-something% of likely Trump voters say that if Biden wins, it's going to be due to voter fraud. And 63% of Biden voters say if Trump wins, it's going to be due to foreign interference or voter suppression or something like that. So basically, you've got roughly half of both sides of supporters saying there's no way that the other guy can win legitimately. And I have thought quite a bit about what's the likelihood that, a lot of people grumble about the election, but they eventually accept it, and there's some protests and stuff, but there's not really anything massive. The safest end of the spectrum, that's kind of like where it is. Mass protests that eventually die down. I don't think anything will get better than that scenario. And of course, this scenario I talked about it on Monday's show. We could have some kind of stock market crash. Maybe foreign governments, people who hold dollars, kind of lose faith in the United States, at least lose faith in the stability of the dollar. Maybe they get out, they seek refuge somewhere else. What does that do to the value of the dollar? Might we have a monetary crash, a dollar crash? So the far end of the spectrum could be, I've talked about this before, like it's either Matt Bracken or Aesop was talking about how their expectation is that this coming domestic conflict or civil war is going to be Yugoslavia times Rwanda. That's how they describe it. And I've never bought into that. I think things could get quite bad. Maybe it's just maybe it's just the optimist in me. Or I just don't see it devolving into hundreds of thousands or millions of dead Americans over this. It could. It could. I'm not saying that it won't. Right now, I just don't think that it will. I think what's probably in everyone's best interest is that we actually just carve up the United States into red and blue country, and people can move if they don't like it. And I think that's the only way we avoid conflict. Now, I think the most likely thing that happens is that we do have political violence, and it becomes organized political violence. One reason why I've really not even shied away, I just kind of rejected this notion of a quote-unquote civil war, because if you look at some accepted definitions, it's two organized sides fighting each other for control of the country. And I don't think there's going to be this level of organization. I think we're going to be talking about here fighting for state or regional sovereignty. And, I don't think people are going to fight over control of Washington. I don't think there's going to be organized military fighting each other over control of D.C. So maybe if you want to apply the term civil war to something like, the Irish Troubles or something like that, okay, that's an acceptable use for me. But civil war is just so vague. It can mean so many different things. So probably next month, I'm going to shore up my final answer on how bad things are going to get. I'm going to publish for Forward Observer subscribers, my expectations. Obviously, it's going to be a range of potentials, and I will say what I think is more likely and what's less likely. A lot of people have said the Spanish Civil War is going to be our model, the fascists versus the anti-fascists. Yeah, maybe. That's coming up next month, though. And by the way, I've been going through a bunch of declassified stuff about Latin American insurgencies this week, because most or all of them were anti-Western, socialist, communist insurgencies. And a lot of these documents, they detail the ins and outs of what was happening during these insurgencies, these leftist insurgencies, and then, kind of documenting U.S. support to counterinsurgency efforts. And I'm taking notes. And I'm going to do a show. I don't know when it's going to be. In the next couple of weeks for sure. I want to do a show about the Salvadoran right-wing death squads soon. Because that's made for some pretty incredible reading about all the things that went on. And, there's a lot of debate about, just how much did the U.S. actually support the right-wing death squads? And I'll do a whole show on it. I did stumble across this gem, which I found pretty humorous. The article is entitled, Salvador Death Squad Leader Becomes Right's Hope. Like the right-wing's hope. And it's about the insurgency there in El Salvador. So I'm reading this report, and the death squad leader is quoted. He's a death squad leader. He now becomes a politician. And he describes communists as watermelons. He says they're green on the outside and red on the inside. Watermelons. And I've used this term for years. The enviro-Nazis, they're green on the outside, they're red on the inside. We call them watermelons. I had no idea that term was that old. This report was from 1983, by the way. So I don't know if this guy coined it or not, but he really hit the nail on the head there. Well, I'm out of notes for today. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Again, if you want to support this show, patreon.com/outfront. All that money is going to go towards studio, building it out. We just got to put some wall frames in here and put some sheetrock up, and then foam and all that other crap. So at any rate, thanks for listening, and until next time, stay out front.